The federal judge's gavel struck as Officer Brennan's boot connected with Dr. Elijah Washington's ribs. Courtroom chaos erupted. Nobody knew the calm black doctor was actually Commander Washington, one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in American history. The Pentagon call that followed would shake the justice system forever. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of justice seekers. The moment that changed the course of this trial will leave you wondering. What would you do if you witnessed such a blatant abuse of power in a place meant to uphold justice? Dr. Elijah Washington's day had begun like countless others, with saving lives. After a grueling 14-hour shift at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, the 42-year-old neurosurgeon was driving home in his midnight blue Mercedes, his mind still replaying the delicate brain surgery he had performed on a 10-year-old girl. The road was nearly empty at this late hour, stars visible above the Atlanta skyline as he navigated the familiar streets toward his Buckhead neighborhood. The flash of blue and red lights in his rearview mirror came as a surprise. Elijah checked his speedometer. He wasn't speeding. He signaled properly, pulled over smoothly, and placed both hands on the steering wheel in plain sight, a routine he had practiced countless times not as a doctor but as a black man in America. Officer Ryan Brennan approached the vehicle with his hand already resting on his holstered weapon flashlight beam, aimed directly at Elijah's face. "License and registration," he demanded, without preamble, his tone immediately aggressive. "Good evening, Officer Elijah," responded calmly. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Brennan's face hardened. "Broken taillight. License and registration now." Elijah knew his car was meticulously maintained. There was no broken taillight, but he remained composed. "Of course, officer. My license is in my wallet in my back pocket, and my registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to move slowly to retrieve them." Brennan watched with suspicious eyes as Elijah carefully extracted his wallet and reached for the glove compartment. When the officer saw the Mercedes registration and Elijah's driver's license with MD clearly printed under his name, his expression shifted momentarily. "This your car, Washington?" he asked, emphasizing the last name with skepticism. "Yes, sir. I've owned it for 3 years." Brennan examined the documentation, then shined his flashlight around the interior of the luxury vehicle. "Pretty nice car for this neighborhood. Where'd you get the money for something like this?" The implication was clear, and Elijah felt the familiar weight of racial profiling settling on his shoulders. "I'm a neurosurgeon at Atlanta Memorial," he replied evenly. Brennan snorted. "Right, and I'm the Surgeon General. Step out of the vehicle now." Elijah's heart rate increased slightly, but years of performing surgery under pressure, and before that operating in combat zones as a SEAL, had taught him perfect control. "Officer, with all due respect, I've provided my identification and registration as requested. Unless you're detaining me for a specific reason, I'd like to know why I need to exit my vehicle." Brennan's face flushed. "That's it," he snapped, reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at Peachtree and West Paces. Got a combative suspect refusing to comply with orders." Elijah remained silent, knowing from experience that anything he said now would only be twisted against him. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars arrived. Officer Brennan briefed them away from Elijah's car, gesturing animatedly. One of the new arrivals, Officer Sophia Martinez, glanced toward Elijah with an expression that suggested discomfort with the situation. The 3 officers approached together. "Sir, exit the vehicle now," ordered Brennan. Elijah complied, moving deliberately, hands visible. "I'm cooperating fully, officers," he said calmly. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." Brennan moved behind Elijah, roughly grabbing his wrists and applying handcuffs with unnecessary force. Elijah winced as the metal bit into his skin, but maintained his composure. By now, lights had come on in nearby houses. An elderly woman in a bathrobe emerged onto her porch across the street, Mrs. Patterson, a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. She held up her phone, clearly recording the scene. Other neighbors began to gather witnesses to the unfolding injustice. While Officers Martinez and the 3rd officer were speaking with some of the onlookers, Brennan conducted a search of Elijah's vehicle. What happened next would later be revealed by Mrs. Patterson's video. Officer Brennan, believing himself unobserved, quickly slipped a small plastic bag from his pocket and tucked it under the driver's seat of Elijah's car. Elijah, standing handcuffed nearby, saw the movement reflected in his car window. His jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Years of SEAL training teaching him to observe, remember, and choose the right moment to act. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Brennan announced theatrically, retrieving the bag he had just planted. He held it up for the other officers to see. "Looks like our doctor likes to get high when he's not cutting into people's brains." The other officers exchanged glances. Martinez stepped forward. "Where exactly did you find that Brennan under the driver's seat?" "Clear as day." Elijah spoke. Then his voice steady. "That's not mine, officers, and I believe Mrs. Patterson across the street has video of Officer Brennan planting that evidence." Brennan's face contorted with rage. He stepped close to Elijah, speaking low enough that only Elijah could hear. "Shut your mouth, boy. Nobody's going to believe you over me." The racial slur was whispered, but the hatred behind it was unmistakable. Brennan grabbed Elijah's arm and began marching him toward the patrol car. "You're under arrest for possession of controlled substances and resisting arrest." As Elijah was placed in the back of the police car, he caught Mrs. Patterson's eye. The elderly woman nodded firmly, holding up her phone to indicate she had captured everything. Elijah was transported to the precinct, his requests for a phone call denied. The handcuffs had been applied so tightly that his hands had begun to lose feeling, but his requests for medical attention were ignored. As a doctor, Elijah knew the potential for nerve damage, but as a former SEAL, he also knew how to endure. He sat silently in the holding cell, mentally preparing for the battle ahead, one that would be fought not with weapons but with truth. The fluorescent lights of the Atlanta Police Department's central booking facility buzzed overhead as Elijah Washington was processed into the system, fingerprinted, photographed, and officially charged with drug possession and resisting arrest. The booking officer avoided eye contact as he processed the paperwork, uncomfortable with the obvious disconnect between the distinguished-looking man before him and the charges being filed. In his office upstairs, Captain Thomas Williams reviewed the arrest report with growing concern. A 23-year veteran of the force, Williams had seen enough questionable arrests to recognize the red flags. A traffic stop for a dubious violation, an escalation without clear cause, and drugs conveniently discovered by an escalation without clear cause. Officer with a history of complaints. Williams pulled up Officer Brennan's personnel file on his computer, noting the 3 previous complaints of excessive force and racial bias, all dismissed after internal review. He rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar pressure that came with these situations. The department was already under scrutiny for racial disparities in arrests, and the last thing they needed was another controversy. But there was also the unwritten code. You protected your own. His desk phone rang the caller ID, showing the extension for Deputy Chief Harrison. "Williams," he answered. "Tom, it's Richard. Just got a call from the police union rep about this arrest Brennan made tonight." "Doctor or something," neurosurgeon Williams corrected. "Just reviewing the report now." "Well, the mayor's office is already getting calls. Some community activist group has video they claim shows irregularities in the arrest procedure." Williams felt his stomach tighten. What kind of irregularities? Who knows? Probably nothing. But in this climate, we need to make sure everything's by the book. The union wants us to get ahead of this. Release a statement supporting our officers' actions pending full review. And if the review shows problems, Williams asked carefully. Harrison's silence spoke volumes. "Just make sure the paperwork's clean, Tom. We don't need another Minneapolis or Louisville situation here." Across town, District Attorney Melissa Cooper was having a similar conversation with her assistant as they reviewed the body cam footage from Brennan's camera. "The timeline doesn't add up," Cooper said, pausing the video. "He calls in that he's found narcotics at timestamp 21:43, but there's this weird gap in the footage between 21:38 and 21:42. Camera malfunction," suggested her assistant. 4 minutes. Exactly. That's convenient." Cooper sighed, glancing at the campaign posters stacked in the corner of her office for her upcoming re-election bid. Her Tough on Crime platform had helped her secure the endorsement of the police union, an endorsement she couldn't afford to lose 5 months before Election Day. "Let's proceed with the charges as filed. If defense counsel raises issues with the footage, we'll address it then. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patterson, the elderly witness who had recorded the incident, arrived at the precinct with her nephew determined to provide her evidence to authorities. The desk sergeant regarded her with barely concealed impatience. "Ma'am, if you have information about a case, you need to fill out this witness statement form and someone will contact you. I have video showing that officer planting drugs in Dr. Washington's car misses." Patterson insisted, holding up her phone. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge of his case." The sergeant's demeanor changed instantly. "That's a serious allegation, ma'am. I'll need to take your phone as evidence." "I'm not surrendering my phone," Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. "I've already backed up the video to my cloud account. I just want to make sure it's properly included in the investigation." "Are you refusing to cooperate with police, ma'am?" the sergeant asked, his tone hardening. Mrs. Patterson's nephew stepped forward. "My aunt is trying to provide evidence of police misconduct. If you're unwilling to accept it properly, we'll take it to the FBI or the media." The sergeant's face flushed. "That sounds like a threat." "It's not a threat," Mrs. Patterson said calmly. "It's what I'll do if you continue obstructing justice." The standoff ended with Mrs. Houtnote Patterson leaving her contact information and a statement describing what she had witnessed, but without any acknowledgement that her video would be included in the investigation. After 8 hours in holding, Elijah was finally permitted legal representation. Sarah Chen, a 34-year-old attorney with the Southern Justice Initiative, arrived at the precinct, her expression shifting from professional detachment to shock when she met her client. Elijah Washington sat composed. Despite his circumstances, the surgical precision of his speech and demeanor immediately betraying his professional background. "Dr. Washington," she said, after their introduction, "I'm reviewing the charges against you, and frankly they don't make sense given your background. You're a neurosurgeon at Atlanta Memorial." "Yes," he confirmed. "I was heading home after a 14-hour shift when I was pulled over." He detailed the events methodically, including his observation of Officer Brennan planting evidence. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patterson, recorded it. She was the one in the bathrobe on her porch. Sarah made notes rapidly. "Why do you think you were targeted?" Elijah met her gaze steadily. "I was driving a luxury vehicle while black in a predominantly white neighborhood. It's not the first time I've been pulled over without cause, but it's the first time evidence has been planted on me." Sarah nodded, unsurprised but still disturbed. "We need to get you out on bail first. The bail hearing is set for tomorrow morning. Given your standing in the community and lack of criminal record, it should be straightforward." What neither of them knew was that behind the scenes, the police department had already begun an internal campaign to justify Brennan's actions. The narrative being constructed portrayed Elijah as belligerent and uncooperative, with suggestions that his professional status made him think he was above the law. The local news that evening ran with the story "Local doctor arrested on drug charges," accompanied by Elijah's mugshot rather than his professional headshot from the hospital's website. The hospital administration, caught in the unexpected controversy, issued a carefully worded statement that they were aware of the situation involving Dr. Washington and monitoring it closely, notably lacking any statement of support for their colleague. As the wheels of the system turned against him, Elijah's only unequivocal allies were his wife, Dr. Amara Washington, a cardiologist at Emory University Hospital, and his attorney Sarah Chen. Unknown to Elijah, news of his arrest had reached beyond Atlanta. Commander Marcus Jackson, who had served alongside Elijah in SEAL Team 6, saw the news report while at his station at Naval Special Warfare Command. Recognizing his former team leader in the mugshot, Jackson immediately placed a call to the Pentagon. "Sir, we have a situation involving Commander Washington," he said when connected to Admiral James Wilson. "I believe he's being railroaded by local police, and they have no idea who they're dealing with." Elijah Washington Wilson asked, instantly alert. "Are you certain?" "Yes, sir. Facial recognition is 100%. It's him." Wilson's voice turned grim. "I'll make some calls. This needs to be handled delicately. His service record is still classified." "Understood, sir. But with respect, we need to move quickly. He's scheduled for a bail hearing tomorrow morning." "Leave it with me," Commander Wilson replied. "Team guys take care of their own." The Atlanta Federal Courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky, its neoclassical columns and grand steps designed to evoke the weight and solemnity of justice. Today, however, an unusual energy surrounded the building. News vans lined the curb, reporters positioned strategically near the entrance, their cameramen adjusting equipment, while on-air personalities touched up makeup and rehearsed their opening lines. The arrest of a prominent neurosurgeon on drug charges had already been newsworthy. Rumors of possible police misconduct had elevated it to the lead story. Elijah Washington arrived in a prison transport van, still wearing the previous day's clothes now wrinkled from his night in custody. Despite his circumstances, he carried himself with dignity as officers escorted him into the building. In the courthouse lobby, Dr. Amara Washington waited with attorney Sarah Chen. Amara's face, normally composed while performing complex heart surgeries, showed the strain of the past 24 hours. When she saw her husband being led in handcuffs through the security checkpoint, her expression flashed with anger before she schooled it back to professional calm. "We're going to fight this," she whispered to Elijah as they were finally permitted a brief moment together. "Mrs. Patterson contacted me. She has everything on video." Elijah nodded almost imperceptibly. "Stay focused," he murmured. "This is just another mission." The courtroom of Judge Catherine Reynolds was already nearly full when they entered. Known for her conservative rulings and pro-police bias, Reynolds had been on the bench for 15 years, appointed by a Republican governor after a career as a prosecutor. Her reputation for running an efficient, no-nonsense courtroom was evident in the brisk pace with which proceedings began. "Bail hearing for State versus Elijah Washington," announced the clerk. "Charges of possession of a controlled substance and resisting arrest." Assistant District Attorney Mark Phillips stood. "Your Honor, the state requests bail be set at $75,000. Despite the defendant's employment status, we believe the serious nature of the charges and the defendant's combative behavior during arrest indicate he may be a flight risk." Sarah Chen rose immediately. "Your Honor, that's absurd. Dr. Washington is a neurosurgeon at Atlanta Memorial with deep ties to this community. He has no criminal record whatsoever. We request release on his own recognizance." Judge Reynolds regarded Chen with thinly veiled impatience. "The court will hear from the arresting officer first." Officer Ryan Brennan took the stand now in his dress uniform, the picture of law enforcement respectability. He recounted a version of events that barely resembled reality. Elijah speeding through a residential neighborhood, responding belligerently to being pulled over, making furtive movements that suggested he might be reaching for a weapon, refusing to exit the vehicle when ordered, and finally the discovery of what appeared to be cocaine under the driver's seat. "And did Dr. Washington continue to resist after you discovered the narcotics?" Phillips asked. "Yes, sir," Brennan responded confidently. "He became verbally abusive, threatened me with his connections, and physically resisted being handcuffed. It took myself and 2 additional officers to subdue him." From her seat, Amara Washington clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had never known her husband to raise his voice, let alone physically resist anyone. As Sarah cross-examined Brennan, she methodically highlighted the inconsistencies in his testimony. "Officer Brennan, you testified that you pulled over Dr. Washington for speeding, yet the citation you issued was for a broken taillight. Which was it?" Brennan hesitated. "He was speeding initially, but I observed the broken taillight when I approached the vehicle." "And you've provided no radar reading to support the speeding claim," Sarah noted. "Moving on, you testified that Dr. Washington made furtive movements suggesting he might be reaching for a weapon. Was a weapon found in the vehicle? No, but yes or no, Officer Brennan. Was a weapon found? Number?" Sarah continued pressing, addressing the gaps in the body cam footage, the lack of drug testing on the seized substance, and the absence of any signs of injury to the officers, despite claims of physical resistance. As Brennan's testimony began to unravel, Judge Reynolds interrupted. "Miss Chen, while I appreciate thoroughness, this is merely a bail hearing, not a trial. Let's move on." At that moment, the courtroom doors opened, and Mrs. Patterson entered with her nephew. Sarah quickly requested permission to call her as a witness. "Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson was an eyewitness to the arrest and has video evidence directly contradicting Officer Brennan's testimony." Judge Reynolds frowned. "This is highly irregular for a bail hearing, Miss Chen." "So is perjury by a police officer, Your Honor," Sarah replied evenly. The courtroom tensed at the bold statement. After a moment of consideration, Reynolds denied the request. The court will not review video evidence at this time. That's a matter for discovery and trial. A murmur of discontent rippled through the spectator section. During a brief recess, Elijah was escorted to a holding area outside the courtroom. Officer Brennan appeared in the hallway, deliberately positioning himself near Elijah out of earshot of others. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Brennan hissed. "Bringing your fancy lawyer and witnesses. Nobody's going to believe them over a cop. When this is done, I'll make sure you never practice medicine again." Elijah met his gaze calmly. "Why are you doing this? You people need to know your place," Brennan replied, the hatred in his voice palpable. "Driving around in luxury cars thinking you're better than everyone else." Before Elijah could respond, a bailiff approached to return him to the courtroom. When proceedings resumed, Judge Reynolds invited Elijah to speak on his own behalf regarding bail. Rising slowly due to his still handcuffed wrists, Elijah addressed the court with the same precise, measured tone he used when explaining complex medical procedures to patients' families. "Your Honor, I am a neurosurgeon who has dedicated my life to saving others. I have never used illegal substances, never been arrested, and have no reason to flee. The charges against me are fabricated. Officer Brennan targeted me because of my race-planted evidence in my vehicle and is now lying under oath." As Elijah systematically dismantled Brennan's narrative, pointing out medical inconsistencies that only a doctor would recognize, the officer grew visibly agitated. Elijah noted the physical impossibility of him resisting in the manner described, while sustaining no injuries himself beyond the cuts from the over-tightened handcuffs which he displayed to the court. Furthermore, the timeline presented by Officer Brennan is medically impossible. He claims I exhibited signs of cocaine influence, yet I had just completed a 14-hour neurosurgical procedure. No one under the influence of cocaine could perform the delicate procedure I conducted yesterday. The surgical precision of Elijah's statement was having a visible effect on the courtroom and on Officer Brennan. The officer's face had flushed dark red, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. As Elijah continued detailing the implausibility of each accusation with calm logic, Brennan suddenly lurched to his feet. "He's lying," he shouted. Before bailiffs could react, Brennan crossed the space between them and delivered a vicious kick to Elijah's midsection. The force sent Elijah crashing to the floor as chaos erupted in the courtroom. Bailiffs rushed to restrain Brennan, who continued shouting racial epithets as he struggled against them. Judge Reynolds banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in the court!" When the commotion subsided, Elijah had been helped back to his feet by Sarah Chen, visibly in pain but still dignified. Incredibly, Judge Reynolds addressed him first, rather than his attacker. "Dr. Washington, what did you say to provoke Officer Brennan?" The question sent another wave of murmurs through the courtroom. Sarah Chen stepped forward, outrage evident in her voice. "Your Honor, my client was physically assaulted in your courtroom while in custody and handcuffed. He did nothing to provoke this attack except present facts that contradicted Officer Brennan's false testimony. I demand immediate action." Do you believe Judge Reynolds should have immediately held Officer Brennan in contempt for his outburst? Comment number 1. If you think the judge should have acted more decisively to protect Elijah in her courtroom. Like and subscribe if you're shocked by this blatant abuse of power happening in a place meant to uphold justice. What do you think will happen next? Will Elijah's true identity as a decorated Navy SEAL be revealed, or will the system continue to work against him despite the clear evidence of misconduct? The courtroom remained in turmoil. Bailiffs had restrained Officer Brennan, forcing him into a chair at the prosecution table, while he continued to mutter under his breath. Elijah Washington had been helped back to his seat by his wife, Dr. Amara, who was examining his ribs with professional concern. Judge Reynolds appeared uncertain how to proceed, her typical courtroom control shattered by the unexpected violence. Sarah Chen stood her ground, refusing to let the moment pass. Your Honor, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client, and request that Officer Brennan be taken into custody for assault and perjury. The judge's face tightened. Miss B.A. Chen, this court will determine the appropriate. At that moment, 1,000 miles away at the Pentagon, Admiral James Wilson was concluding a series of urgent phone calls that had begun the previous night. As the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command, Wilson had immediate access to the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. What Commander Jackson had revealed about Elijah Washington's situation had set in motion a rapid response protocol reserved for extraordinary circumstances. "Get me the Attorney General," Wilson directed his aide after confirming details with the Department of Defense legal team. "Then connect me to the Chief Judge of the Northern District of Georgia. This stops now." Within minutes, the DoD's top lawyers had prepared a briefing for the Attorney General, outlining the classified nature of Washington's service record and the national security implications of his case. The Attorney General, recognizing the severity of the situation, immediately contacted the federal courthouse in Atlanta. Back in Judge Reynolds' courtroom, the bailiff approached the bench with an unusual interruption. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "there's an urgent call for you from the Chief Judge's office. They say it's a matter of national security." Reynolds frowned, unused to having her proceedings interrupted. "We're in the middle of a hearing," she began, but something in the bailiff's expression gave her pause. "Fine. 5-minute recess." As she exited to her chambers, the spectators buzzed with speculation. Elijah remained calm, though a flicker of understanding crossed his features. In her chambers, Judge Reynolds picked up the secure line. "This is Judge Reynolds." The voice on the other end was clipped and authoritative. "Judge Reynolds, this is Chief Judge Michael Harrington. I have the Attorney General of the United States on the line regarding the case currently in your courtroom." Reynolds straightened instinctively. "The Washington bail hearing. What possible interest could the Attorney General have in a local drug case?" "I'll let him explain," Harrington replied, and the line switched over. "Judge Reynolds, this is Attorney General Robert Griffith. I'm calling regarding Dr. Elijah Washington." The Attorney General's voice was grave. "I've just been briefed by the Department of Defense on a matter of national security pertaining to your defendant. The individual in your courtroom is not merely a neurosurgeon. He is Commander Elijah Washington, formerly of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, what civilians know as SEAL Team 6. His service record remains highly classified, but I am authorized to inform you that he is a Medal of Honor recipient whose actions have been vital to national security." Reynolds sank into her chair, the color draining from her face. I had no idea. Few people do. That's by design." Commander Washington transitioned to civilian life after sustaining injuries during a classified operation. The Department of Defense takes an extraordinary interest in ensuring he is treated fairly. The implication was clear. This was not a request. "What do you need me to do?" Reynolds asked her. Judicial independence suddenly feeling much less absolute. "A Navy JAG Corps Attorney Commander Michael Hayes is en route to your courthouse by military helicopter as we speak. He has the authority to present Commander Washington's service record to you in camera. Until he arrives, I strongly advise you to ensure no further harm comes to Commander Washington and to reconsider the matter of his detention." When Judge Reynolds returned to the courtroom, the transformation in her demeanor was immediately apparent. Her face was pale, her movements stiff with what appeared to be shock. "This court is in recess for 30 minutes, she announced without explanation, then added Officer Brennan is to remain in custody of the court bailiffs until further notice. The courtroom erupted in confused murmurs as she quickly exited again. Within 20 minutes, a commotion outside the courthouse drew attention as a military helicopter landed in the adjacent park. From it emerged a man in the crisp uniform of a Navy commander carrying a secure briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. He was escorted into the building by federal agents who had appeared seemingly from nowhere. When court resumed, the naval officer was seated at a new table positioned between the prosecution and defense. Judge Reynolds addressed the court with a markedly different tone than before. "In light of new information presented to this court, we will be proceeding differently than planned." District Attorney Cooper approached the bench along with Miss Chen and Commander Hayes. The three attorneys huddled with the judge, their conversation inaudible to the spectators. District Attorney Cooper's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as Commander Hayes opened his briefcase and showed her a document. She stepped back visibly shaken and nodded. The judge then made an announcement that stunned the courtroom. "Bailiffs place Officer Ryan Brennan under arrest for assault evidence, tampering, filing false reports, and violation of civil rights under color of law." As a shocked Brennan was handcuffed, with the same restraints he had placed too tightly on Elijah's wrists the night before. Judge Reynolds continued. Furthermore, all charges against Dr. Live, with Head Niter 60A, Elijah Washington, are dismissed with prejudice. Dr. Washington, you are free to go with the court's sincere apologies for your treatment. The spectators erupted, reporters rushing from the courtroom to break the story. Brennan shouted as he was led away. What the hell is happening? You can't do this. Do you know who my family is? Sarah Chen turned to Elijah with bewilderment. What just happened? She whispered. Elijah simply shook his head slightly, a gesture that clearly meant not here. As the handcuffs were removed from Elijah's wrists, Commander Hayes approached him, standing at a position of attention that civilians might not recognize, but that spoke volumes to Elijah. Commander Washington Hayes said quietly, using his military rank, rather than his civilian title, Admiral Wilson, sends his regards and apologies for the delay in our intervention. Elijah nodded once the exchange witnessed by confused onlookers who couldn't understand the sudden reversal of fortune or why a Navy commander was showing such deference to a civilian doctor. As the Washington family prepared to leave, the courthouse media representatives swarmed around them, shouting questions. Dr. Washington, why did the military intervene? In your case, what is your relationship with the Pentagon? Were you really in the Navy? Elijah responded with a practiced, no comment, as Sarah Chen helped create a path through the crowd. But the questions continued and the speculation had just begun. The dramatic phone call, the military helicopter, the Navy commander with the classified briefcase, none of it made sense for a simple case of mistaken arrest. As they reached the courthouse steps, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution called out, Dr. Washington, are you the same? Elijah Washington, who received the Medal of Honor in a classified ceremony 5 years ago. Elijah paused momentarily, just long enough for the cameras to capture his reaction. It was all the confirmation they needed. By nightfall, the story would transform from one of police misconduct to something much more intriguing. Who exactly was Dr. Elijah Washington, and what had he done to warrant such extraordinary intervention from the highest levels of government? The Washington family home in Buckhead was a sanctuary of calm compared to the chaos of the courthouse. The elegant two-story colonial, with its manicured lawn and stately oak trees, reflected nothing of the military precision with which Elijah Washington had once operated in the world's most dangerous environments. Inside, Elijah sat on the edge of his bed as Amara carefully examined his ribs, her cardiologist's hands, gentle but thorough in their assessment. Bruised, not broken, she concluded, applying a cold compress to the already darkening area where Brennan's boot had connected. You were lucky. Elijah smiled faintly. Not luck. I turned with the impact. Old habits. Amara's eyes met his, understanding passing between them. She was one of the few people who knew the full extent of her husband's former life. They're going to dig now, she said quietly. The media, the department, everyone. The seal is broken on your record. Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned. It was always a possibility. Admiral Wilson will control what gets released. The important operations will remain classified. A soft knock at the bedroom door interrupted them. Sarah Chen stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of professional curiosity and personal concern. The Pentagon lawyers are downstairs, she said. They'd like to brief you on next steps. Elijah nodded. I'll be down in a minute. When Sarah had gone, Amara helped him into a fresh shirt. Are you ready for what comes next? She asked. Elijah took a deep breath, memories of his past life surfacing like shadows in deep water. I've been preparing for this day since I left the teams, he replied. Some stories need to be told. The story of Elijah Washington began far from the elite world of neurosurgery or special operations. Born in South Atlanta to a high school math teacher and a city bus driver, young Elijah's intelligence was evident from an early age. His parents sacrificed everything to move to a better school district where Elijah thrived, despite being one of only a handful of black students. His academic excellence earned him a full scholarship to Howard University, where he majored in biology with a single-minded focus on medical school. It was during his second year at Howard Medical School that financial reality intruded on his dreams. Despite his scholarship and part-time jobs, the mounting debt of medical education threatened to derail his future. A Navy recruiter visiting campus offered a solution: the Health Professions Scholarship Program. In exchange for military service after graduation, the Navy would pay for his medical education. Elijah signed the papers that day, seeing it as a straightforward transaction: financial support for service obligation. What neither he nor the recruiter could have predicted was how Elijah's unique combination of physical ability, intelligence, and temperament would catch the attention of Naval Special Warfare Command. During his residency at Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth, Elijah was invited to provide medical support for SEAL training evolutions. His exceptional performance under pressure and natural leadership abilities led to an unusual offer: additional training to become a Special Operations Surgical Team member. These elite medical units operated in combat zones, often working in the most austere conditions imaginable. Elijah accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to test his skills in environments where they were most needed. What began as medical support evolved when Elijah's aptitude for special operations became impossible to ignore. After witnessing Elijah's quick thinking during an ambush that separated him from his protection team in Afghanistan, a SEAL team commander recommended him for assessment and selection to become an actual SEAL operator, an almost unheard-of lateral move for a medical officer. The assessment course was designed to break candidates physically and mentally. Of the 24 officers who began with Elijah, only 9 completed the course. Elijah finished first in his class despite being older than most candidates and facing subtle but persistent racism from instructors and fellow trainees alike. One instructor, a crusty Master Chief with 30 years of service, had made it his personal mission to eliminate the doctor from the program. "The battlefield doesn't care about your fancy degree," he would say, during endless sessions of physical torture disguised as training. "The enemy doesn't care what color your skin is either, except that it makes you an easier target in the snow." Elijah never complained, never quit, and gradually earned something more valuable than acceptance: respect. Upon earning his trident, the insignia of a Navy SEAL, Elijah was assigned to SEAL Team 4, where he served 2 combat deployments before being selected for the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6, the most elite counterterrorism unit in the military. It was with Team 6 that Elijah found his true calling, rising through the ranks to eventually become the first black commander of an assault squadron. His operational record remained mostly classified, but certain facts had emerged through authorized channels: over 15 years of service, 12 combat deployments, and leadership of some of the most significant counterterrorism operations in recent history. The Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, came after an operation that officially never happened, in a country the United States was not operating in. What could be acknowledged was that Elijah's actions had saved the lives of his entire team and dozens of hostages while suffering severe injuries that required 6 months of rehabilitation. Those injuries eventually led to his medical retirement and return to his original passion: medicine. Using his GI Bill benefits and savings, Elijah completed an accelerated neurosurgery fellowship, eventually joining the staff at Atlanta Memorial. His military background remained known only to those with a need to know, allowing him to build a new life focused on healing rather than warfare. Throughout his extraordinary career, one constant remained: the regular experience of racial profiling and discrimination despite his service and status. Whether in uniform or out, Elijah had been pulled over by police more times than he could count, always for trivial or non-existent infractions, always with the same underlying suspicion that a black man in a nice car or an affluent neighborhood must be doing something illegal. Each time Elijah responded with the same disciplined restraint he had shown Officer Brennan. It wasn't fear that motivated this restraint. Few men on earth had less to fear in physical confrontations than a former SEAL Team 6 commander. Rather, it was a philosophy of quiet strength of discipline as a form of resistance. "There are 2 ways to fight injustice," he had once told a young black SEAL candidate struggling with similar experiences. "You can destroy what's in front of you, or you can become so exceptional they can't ignore you. Both have their place." In the elegant living room of his Buckhead home, Elijah now sat surrounded by military and civilian officials, discussing which parts of his service record would be declassified to explain the extraordinary intervention in his case. The story that would emerge would be carefully curated, enough to establish his credentials without compromising operational security. "The nation owes you a debt it can never fully repay," Commander said, one of the Pentagon officials. "The least we can do is ensure you don't suffer further injustice." Elijah's expression remained measured, betraying none of the complex emotions beneath. "What about the systemic issues this case reveals?" he asked. "My situation was resolved because of who I am and the connections I have. What about all the others who don't have the Pentagon on speed dial?" The officials exchanged uncomfortable glances. "That's beyond our purview, sir." Elijah nodded, having expected the answer. "Then we have more work to do." The story exploded across the nation with the force of a precision strike. Black neurosurgeon revealed as decorated Navy SEAL after police misconduct read the headline of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The New York Times followed with Pentagon intervenes in case of racially profiled war hero, while Fox News took a different angle. Medal of Honor recipient, targeted by rogue officer, not systemic racism. Every major network led with some version of the story, the dramatic courtroom confrontation and military intervention, providing irresistible visuals. Cable news panels debated every angle from police reform to military overreach in civilian affairs. While Elijah Washington had retreated to the privacy of his home, refusing all interview requests, Officer Ryan Brennan's history was being meticulously excavated by investigative journalists. The Atlanta Journal, Constitution's investigation, revealed a pattern of complaints against Brennan that had been systematically downplayed or dismissed. "Officer named in Washington case has history of racial complaints," their headline declared, detailing 7 previous allegations of excessive force against black citizens over Brennan's 8-year career. None had resulted in disciplinary action. A deeper dive by ProPublica uncovered Brennan's concerning social media history, including membership in private Facebook groups with racist content and posts mocking victims of police violence. Most damning was the revelation that Brennan's uncle was a deputy commissioner in the department, suggesting a potential explanation for the officer's apparent immunity from consequences. Police Chief Gerald Morris, a 28-year veteran of the force who had risen through the ranks during an era when such behavior was often overlooked, found himself thrust before cameras at an emergency press conference. Visibly uncomfortable, Morris attempted to control the narrative. "This is an isolated incident involving one officer who failed to uphold our standards," he insisted. "The Atlanta Police Department does not tolerate racism or misconduct of any kind." His words rang hollow as reporters bombarded him with statistics showing racial disparities in the department's arrest and use of force incidents. The breaking point came when someone shouted, "Have you seen Mrs. Patterson's video?" Yet Morris's hesitation before answering told the public everything they needed to know. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly witness whose video evidence had been initially dismissed, had become an unexpected hero in the unfolding drama. After being turned away by the police department, her nephew had helped her upload the video to social media, where it quickly went viral. The footage clearly showed Officer Brennan planting evidence in Elijah's car, contradicting the official police report and Brennan's sworn testimony. The 80-second clip had been viewed over 12 million times within 24 hours. Amid the growing scandal, protests formed outside police headquarters and the courthouse. What began as a few dozen demonstrators swelled to thousands by the third day, their signs demanding justice for Elijah and reform APD. Now, the protest remained peaceful, but determined, drawing participants from across the demographic spectrum. The image of a decorated war hero and brilliant surgeon being assaulted in court had crossed political and racial lines in a way few incidents could. On social media, the hashtag number Justice for Elijah trended nationally, with celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens sharing the story and calling for accountability. Conservative media outlets attempted to focus solely on Elijah's military service while downplaying the racial aspects of the case. American hero disrespected became their preferred framing, with some commentators going so far as to question whether Elijah had somehow provoked the situation. These attempts at reframing were swiftly countered by an unexpected source. Admiral James Wilson appeared on several news programs in full dress uniform, adorned with his own impressive array of decorations. "I've known Commander Washington for 15 years," Wilson stated firmly on one primetime interview. "He is the embodiment of our core values: honor, courage, and commitment." The suggestion that he would ever conduct himself inappropriately with law enforcement is absurd to anyone who knows him. When one host attempted to question the veracity of Elijah's military record, Wilson's response was ice cold. "I commanded naval special warfare when Commander Washington led some of the most critical operations in our nation's recent history. I personally recommended him for the Medal of Honor. Are you questioning my integrity as well?" The host quickly backpedaled. Perhaps most powerfully, several of Elijah's former SEAL teammates came forward with statements of support, their identities concealed due to their ongoing operational status. "Commander Washington taught us to maintain absolute discipline under pressure," one stated. "If he says he was compliant during that traffic stop, I'd bet my life on it. I have many times." As public pressure mounted, Atlanta's mayor announced the formation of a special investigation committee to review not just Elijah's case, but the department's patterns and practices regarding racial profiling and complaint. Investigation. Simultaneously, the FBI's Civil Rights Division confirmed they had opened a formal investigation into the Atlanta Police Department. Throughout the media storm, Elijah himself remained silent, declining the flood of interview requests from every major outlet. This absence only intensified interest in his story, creating a void that others rushed to fill. Dr. Amara Washington emerged as her husband's most powerful advocate, her poise and eloquence making her a compelling spokesperson. "My husband has spent his entire life in service to others," she told Anderson Cooper in a CNN exclusive. "First as a warrior, now as a healer. The fact that none of that mattered the moment a police officer saw his skin color is exactly why we need systemic change." Behind the scenes, the case was creating ripple effects within the Atlanta Police Department itself. Captain Thomas Williams, who had initially felt pressured to support Brennan despite his misgivings, found himself at a moral crossroads. After watching Mrs. Patterson's video and hearing Admiral Wilson's testimonials about Elijah's character, Williams made a decision that would alter the course of the investigation. Meeting secretly with FBI agents at a coffee shop miles from the precinct, Williams provided internal communications, showing a coordinated effort to justify Brennan's actions, despite clear evidence of misconduct. "This isn't an isolated incident," Williams told the agents. "The department has a pattern of protecting officers like Brennan, especially those with family connections to leadership." His testimony was soon bolstered by Officer Sophia Martinez, who had been present at Elijah's arrest. Initially reluctant to speak against a fellow officer, Martinez came forward after watching the courtroom assault video. "Officer Brennan has a history of targeting black motorists," she revealed in a sworn statement to Internal Affairs. "Many of us have witnessed it but feared retaliation if we reported it." The police union, which had initially issued a strong statement supporting Brennan, found itself in an increasingly untenable position as evidence mounted. Their revised statement, released 5 days after the courtroom incident, notably omitted any defense of Brennan himself, while maintaining their general support for officers who serve honorably. Judge Catherine Reynolds, whose initial handling of the case had drawn criticism, became the subject of a judicial review when court records revealed a pattern of rulings that consistently favored police testimony over civilian witnesses, particularly in cases involving minorities. The Georgia Bar Association called for an investigation into whether her conduct reflected bias incompatible with judicial office. As pressure mounted from multiple directions, District Attorney Melissa Cooper faced her own political crisis. Her primary challenger immediately made the Washington case a central campaign issue, criticizing Cooper's initial decision to proceed with charges despite the questionable evidence. Facing a potential election loss, Cooper announced that her office would conduct a comprehensive review of all cases involving Officer Brennan and his close associates on the force. By the end of the week, the department's Internal Affairs Division had opened investigations into 12 other officers associated with Brennan, examining their arrest records for similar patterns of misconduct. What began as a single incident of injustice was rapidly expanding into a systemic reckoning. Do you believe more officers like Martinez should come forward when they witness misconduct, even if it means risking their careers? Comment number 1. If you think police officers have a duty to report their colleagues' wrongdoing, regardless of the blue wall of silence. Like and subscribe if you're following this unfolding story of justice delayed but not denied. The question remains, how deep does this corruption go? And will anyone, beyond Officer Brennan, be held accountable for the systemic failures that allowed him to operate with impunity for so long? The unmarked FBI sedan pulled into the empty parking lot of Piedmont Park at 5:30 in the morning, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist. Captain Thomas Williams arrived 10 minutes later, parking his personal vehicle several spaces away. He sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, before finally exiting and walking to the federal agent's car. This was his third meeting with the FBI's Civil Rights Division in 2 weeks, and each time he brought more damaging information about the department he had served for over 2 decades. Today's meeting would be the most consequential yet. Special Agent Diana Rodriguez greeted him with a professional nod as he slid into the back seat. "Captain Williams, thank you for coming. Did you bring the files we discussed?" Williams placed a thumb drive on the console between the front seats. "Everything's there. Brennan's complete disciplinary history, including the complaints that never made it into his official record. There are 11 incidents that were buried by Deputy Commissioner Brennan, his uncle." Agent Rodriguez pocketed the drive. "This is significant evidence for our pattern and practice investigation. You understand you'll likely be called to testify." Williams nodded grimly. "I've made my peace with that. The department I joined wasn't perfect, but we had principles. Somewhere along the way we lost them." As Williams provided his detailed testimony, Officer Sofia Martinez was facing her own moment of truth across town. After coming forward about Brennan's history of targeting black motorists, she had been ostracized by many of her colleagues. Her locker had been vandalized with the word "rat" spray-painted across it, and several officers refused to respond to her calls for backup. Despite this, Martinez sat in the Internal Affairs office reviewing body cam footage from dozens of Brennan's traffic stops. This one from March shows the same pattern she explained to the IA investigator. Brennan pulls over a black driver in Buckhead, claims to smell marijuana, conducts a search that finds nothing, but still issues 3 separate citations for minor infractions. The investigator nodded, adding the incident to a spreadsheet that now contained over 40 similar stops. And none of these resulted in complaints. Most people don't file formal complaints over traffic stops, even when they're harassed, Martinez explained. They just want to get home safely. And Brennan was smart. He targeted professionals who had too much to lose by making waves. Dr. Washington was probably the first one who had the resources and standing to fight back effectively. The police union, initially vocal in defending Brennan, found itself in an increasingly difficult position as evidence of his misconduct mounted. After a contentious emergency meeting, the union president issued a carefully worded statement. "While we continue to support the rights of all officers to due process, the union cannot and will not defend actions that violate our oath to protect and serve." Officer Brennan's alleged conduct, if proven true, represents a fundamental betrayal of that oath. This remarkable retreat from their usual unconditional support signaled the severity of the situation and the impossibility of maintaining the traditional blue wall of silence. Meanwhile, the judicial system was conducting its own internal examination. Judge Catherine Reynolds, whose handling of Elijah's case had drawn criticism, was now subject to a comprehensive review by the State Judicial Qualifications Commission. Their preliminary analysis revealed disturbing patterns in cases involving police testimony contradicted by civilian witnesses. Reynolds had sided with police 94% of the time. When those civilian witnesses were minorities, that number rose to 98%. Reynolds' calendar was quietly cleared of all cases involving police testimony, pending the outcome of the investigation. District Attorney Melissa Cooper, sensing the shifting political winds, moved aggressively to distance herself from the scandal. Her office announced a sweeping review of all cases involving Officer Brennan and 5 other officers identified as his closest associates on the force. "The integrity of our justice system depends on the reliability of law enforcement testimony. Cooper stated at a press conference, carefully avoiding any admission that her office had initially pursued charges against Elijah, despite obvious red flags. Any case that does not meet our office's high standard for evidence will be dismissed. Her primary challenger immediately called the move too little, too late, pointing out that Cooper had been willing to proceed with Elijah's case despite the suspicious gaps in body cam footage and other inconsistencies. Behind closed doors, the most explosive development came from the department's internal affairs investigation. A deep dive into Brennan's background revealed what should have been disqualifying information from the start: documented connections to white supremacist groups through family members concerning posts on fringe online forums traced to his home IP address and psychological evaluation notes from his academy days that identified potential issues with authority figures from minority groups that had somehow been overlooked in the hiring process. The investigating psychologist, now retired, admitted to IA investigators that he had flagged Brennan as a potential concern but had been pressured to pass him by department leadership, citing the candidate's family connections. As these revelations spread within the department, other victims of Brennan's misconduct began coming forward. James Thompson, a black software engineer who had been pulled over by Brennan 3 times in 2 months while driving his Tesla, described similar patterns of harassment and baseless searches. Dr. Keisha Johnson, a professor at Emory University, recounted being handcuffed and forced to sit on the curb for 45 minutes while Brennan searched her vehicle after a routine traffic stop, finding nothing. Attorney Michael Robinson described being pulled from his car at gunpoint when Brennan claimed he matched the description of a robbery suspect, despite Robinson wearing a suit and driving a luxury car that had no connection to the crime. And Question. The mounting testimonies painted a picture not of isolated incidents, but of a systematic campaign of racial intimidation conducted under the color of law. More disturbing was the evidence that Brennan's behavior had been repeatedly reported through official channels, yet no action had been taken. Captain Williams' testimony to the FBI revealed why there was an unwritten policy of protecting officers with family connections to leadership. Deputy Commissioner Brennan made it clear that complaints against his nephew were to be handled with discretion, which everyone understood to mean buried. The investigation expanded beyond Brennan himself to examine the system that had enabled him. Department records showed that officers with the highest numbers of racial profiling complaints were concentrated in specific precincts and under specific supervisors, suggesting the problem wasn't just a few bad apples, but potentially a cultural issue within certain units. Chief Gerald Morris, who had initially attempted to characterize the Washington incident as isolated, found his position increasingly untenable as evidence of systemic issues mounted. After a particularly contentious city council meeting where community members presented documentation of years of unaddressed complaints, Morris submitted his resignation, effective immediately. The mayor appointed Deputy Chief Rebecca Johnson, a 25-year veteran with a reputation for integrity, as interim chief with a mandate to implement comprehensive reforms. As these internal reckonings unfolded within various institutions, Elijah Washington began working with a team of civil rights attorneys to develop a broader case addressing the systemic issues his experience had highlighted. Rather than focusing solely on his own mistreatment, Elijah's legal strategy expanded to include other victims of similar misconduct, with Sarah Chen coordinating a potential class action lawsuit against the department. "This isn't about one officer or one incident," Chen explained during a strategy session at the Washington home. "This is about dismantling a system that allowed that officer to operate with impunity for years, despite multiple complaints and clear evidence of bias." Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The goal isn't punishment, it's transformation. The department needs new training, new accountability mechanisms, and new leadership culture. We need to build something better, not just tear down what exists." Amara squeezed her husband's hand, recognizing in his words the same strategic thinking that had made him an exceptional military commander and surgeon. He wasn't interested in winning a battle. He was planning to win the war against systemic injustice, methodically, strategically, and completely. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta buzzed with tension on the morning of United States versus Ryan Brennan. The same building that had witnessed Brennan's assault on Elijah Washington now hosted the officer's criminal trial. Security was heightened with U.S. Marshals conducting thorough screenings of all entrants after threats had been made against both the defendant and key witnesses. Inside courtroom 4B, federal prosecutors had assembled a formidable case against the former officer, who now faced multiple charges: violation of civil rights under color of law, assault evidence, tampering filing, false reports, and obstruction of justice. The potential sentence, if convicted on all counts, could exceed 20 years. Brennan sat at the defense table, in a navy blue suit that couldn't quite disguise his diminished appearance. The 7 weeks since his arrest had transformed the once arrogant officer into a haggard figure, the confidence in his impunity shattered by the mounting evidence against him. His defense team, initially provided by the police union, had been replaced by private attorneys after the union withdrew support following the internal investigation's findings. U.S. Attorney Caroline Mitchell opened the government's case with a powerful statement. "This trial is about trust. The trust we place in those who wear the badge. The trust that laws will be enforced fairly and equally for all citizens." Ryan Brennan betrayed that trust, repeatedly and deliberately targeting citizens based on race-falsifying evidence and ultimately assaulting a respected doctor and decorated military veteran in a courtroom when his lies were exposed. The defense strategy quickly became apparent: paint Brennan as a dedicated officer making split-second decisions in a dangerous job, and subtly suggest that Elijah Washington, despite his credentials, had somehow presented as threatening. Officer Brennan has served this community for 8 years, placing himself in harm's way daily, his attorney argued. The prosecution's case relies heavily on the word of a man trained in combat techniques who admitted to being part of classified military operations. Who truly represented the greater potential threat in that encounter? The suggestion drew audible murmurs of disbelief from the gallery. As the trial proceeded, prosecutors methodically dismantled every aspect of Brennan's version of events. The complete body camera footage, enhanced by FBI technical experts, clearly showed Brennan planting evidence in Elijah's vehicle. Backs, a momentary blur that might have been dismissed as camera movement, was revealed frame by frame to be Brennan, removing something from his pocket and placing it under the driver's seat. Forensic analysis of the seized drugs found Brennan's DNA on the packaging, but none of Elijah's, further confirming the evidence had been planted. Expert witnesses from policing backgrounds testified to the impossibility of Brennan's claims. Based on the body camera footage, Dr. Washington complied with every lawful order promptly and respectfully, stated former Chicago Police Superintendent Marcus Bell. There was no legal basis for the search of his vehicle, no probable cause for arrest, and certainly no justification for the level of force used during handcuffing. The prosecution called a series of former colleagues who reluctantly testified about Brennan's history of racist comments. Officer Kevin Rodriguez described hearing Brennan refer to black neighborhoods as animal zones and brag about targeting thugs in nice cars. Sergeant Amy Peterson recounted Brennan's anger after being temporarily assigned to a predominantly black precinct, including his comment that he didn't become a cop to serve those people. Captain Thomas Williams provided the most damaging testimony, methodically outlining the departmental culture that had protected Brennan despite numerous complaints. There was an understanding that Officer Brennan was untouchable due to his family connections, Williams stated. Complaints against him were routinely downgraded or dismissed entirely. This wasn't just favoritism. It was a systematic subversion of accountability mechanisms. Mrs. Patterson finally had her day in court as well, the elderly teacher describing what she had witnessed from her porch and explaining why she had felt compelled to record the encounter. "I've lived in that neighborhood for 42 years, she said firmly. "I've seen too many black men mistreated by police who thought nobody was watching. That night, somebody was." Her complete video evidence, authenticated by FBI analysts, contradicted Brennan's account at every turn. When Brennan himself took the stand, the decision quickly proved disastrous for his defense. Under Mitchell's skilled cross-examination, he repeatedly contradicted his previous statements, growing increasingly agitated as she highlighted each inconsistency. "You testified that you pulled Dr. Washington over for speeding. Yet your initial report cited a broken taillight. Which was it, Mr. Brennan? I observed both violations, Brennan insisted. Why does neither your written report nor your verbal radio call mention speeding? I must have forgotten to include it in the heat of the moment. Just as you forgot to mention drawing your weapon during the stop, Mitchell pressed. That's different. Officer safety. Let's discuss officer safety. Mitchell interrupted, displaying a still image from the body camera. Is this Doctor? Washington, with his hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. Yes, but... And at this point, had he made any threatening movements whatsoever, you can't see everything from that angle. Mr. Brennan, the jury has watched the complete footage. There is not a single moment where Dr. Washington does anything but comply with your instructions. Yet you escalated a routine traffic stop into an arrest with potentially life-altering consequences. Why is that Brennan's face flushed? He was disrespectful. In what way? His tone. The way he looked at me. So it was his tone and his look that justified falsifying charges against him. The most damaging moment came when Mitchell introduced text messages recovered from Brennan's phone showing conversations with fellow officers about deliberately targeting black drivers in affluent neighborhoods. Let's go hunting in Buckhead tonight. Read one message sent hours before Elijah's arrest. These rich ones think they're untouchable. Love to see their faces when the cuffs go on. As the prosecution's case neared completion, they called their final and most anticipated witness, Dr. Elijah Washington. The courtroom fell silent. As Elijah took the stand, his bearing dignified, yet approachable in a simple charcoal suit. Unlike his previous court appearance, this time he was treated with the respect his position commanded, with even the defense attorneys addressing him as Dr. Washington or occasionally Commander. Elijah recounted the events of that night with clinical precision, his testimony aligning perfectly with the video evidence and contradicting Brennan's account at every turn. When asked why he hadn't identified himself as a former Navy SEAL during the encounter, his response was powerful in its simplicity. My military service shouldn't have been necessary to ensure fair treatment. Being a law-abiding citizen should have been enough. Being a human being should have been enough. The defense cross-examination treaded carefully, aware of the risk in appearing to attack a decorated veteran and respected surgeon. They focused instead on whether Elijah might have misinterpreted Brennan's actions or tone due to preconceptions about police. Elijah's response silenced the courtroom. In my military career, I led operations where split-second decisions determined whether people lived or died. I was trained to observe and assess situations without emotional bias. What I observed that night wasn't a misinterpretation. It was a deliberate pattern of escalation, intimidation, and ultimately criminal conduct by Officer Brennan. After 7 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, Brennan slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally seeming to penetrate. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. When that day arrived, Judge Raymond Ortiz delivered a powerful statement before announcing the sentence. Mr. Brennan, you were entrusted with a badge that represents justice, protection, and service to all citizens equally. You betrayed that trust repeatedly and deliberately. Your actions reflect not only personal failings, but the failings of a system that enabled your misconduct. The sentence I impose today must reflect both the harm you've caused and the message that no one, especially those sworn to uphold the law, is above it. Brennan was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, one of the harshest sentences ever imposed for civil rights violations by a police officer. As Brennan was led away in handcuffs, Elijah remained seated in the gallery, his expression not triumphant but thoughtful. This case had never been about revenge for him. It was about accountability, about systems change, about ensuring that what happened to him wouldn't happen to others without consequence. In the quiet moment after the courtroom cleared, Elijah turned to Amara and Sarah Chen. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly. "One case won't change the system. But it's a start." 6 months after Ryan Brennan's sentencing, Atlanta had changed. The spring cherry blossoms around the city seemed to symbolize the renewal taking place within its institutions of justice. On a bright April morning, Elijah Washington stood at a podium in City Hall Plaza, addressing a diverse crowd gathered for the launch of the Washington Justice Initiative, a foundation established to provide legal support to victims of police misconduct and advocate for systemic reforms. This foundation isn't about punishment. Elijah explained, his surgeon's hands resting lightly on the podium. It's about healing. Healing individuals who have suffered injustice, and healing a system that has perpetuated it. Just as medicine has evolved through self-examination and evidence-based improvement, so too must our justice system. The foundation, funded initially by a substantial settlement from the city and donations from supporters nationwide, had already taken on 34 cases across 3 states. But Elijah's vision extended beyond individual legal victories to fundamental systemic change. Behind him on the stage sat partners in this vision. Sarah Chen, now heading the Civil Rights Division of a major law firm, Mrs. Patterson, whose courage in recording and sharing evidence had made her an unlikely civil rights icon at 70, and interim police chief Rebecca Johnson, whose leadership was transforming the Atlanta Police Department from within. The department itself was undergoing a profound evolution. Chief Johnson, with the mayor's full support, had implemented sweeping reforms, a new early warning system to identify officers with patterns of concerning behavior, mandatory body cameras with strict penalties for deactivation, civilian oversight with actual disciplinary authority, and most significantly, a complete restructuring of the Internal Affairs Division, now led by the recently promoted Captain Sophia Martinez. The officers who had initially ostracized Martinez for breaking the blue wall of silence now found themselves marginalized instead, as the department's culture gradually shifted toward transparency and accountability. Those who had protected Brennan and officers like him faced their own reckonings. Deputy Commissioner Edward Brennan, Ryan's uncle, had resigned under pressure, as investigations revealed his role in suppressing complaints. Judge Catherine Reynolds had been removed from the bench following the judicial review that confirmed her pattern of biased rulings. District Attorney Melissa Cooper had lost her re-election bid to a reform candidate who promised to prioritize justice over conviction rates. Captain Thomas Williams, whose testimony had been crucial to both Brennan's conviction and the broader departmental reforms, now consulted nationally on police accountability structures, helping other cities learn from Atlanta's painful experience and subsequent transformation. The city's approach to policing was becoming a model studied by departments across the country. A new training program focused on de-escalation, implicit bias recognition, and community engagement had been implemented, with Elijah himself occasionally speaking to cadet classes about the importance of seeing citizens as individuals, worthy of dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or neighborhood. The Department of Defense had made the unprecedented decision to award Elijah the Outstanding Civilian Service Medal, recognizing his contributions to justice reform as an extension of his military service to the nation. Admiral Wilson, now retired, had presented the medal in a ceremony that acknowledged Elijah's unique journey from warrior to healer to justice advocate. On a more personal level, Elijah and Amara were expecting their first child, a daughter they planned to name Hope, a testament to their belief in the possibility of positive change even in the face of deeply entrenched problems. Their home, once surrounded by news vans and protesters, had become a quiet sanctuary again, though Elijah now regularly hosted small strategy sessions with civil rights leaders, reform-minded police officials, and community organizers. After months of declining interview requests, Elijah had finally agreed to one exclusive conversation with a respected journalist known for thoughtful, nuanced reporting. Rather than focusing on his mistreatment, Elijah used the platform to discuss solutions. We need police officers. We need them to be well-trained, well-supported, and held to the highest standards. The goal isn't to vilify law enforcement, but to transform it into what it should be, a service that protects and respects all communities equally. The most profound circle closure came 6 months after Brennan's sentencing, when Elijah was invited to address the graduating class of the Reformed Police Academy. Standing before 200 new officers, preparing to take their oath, Elijah shared his unique perspective as someone who had worn both the uniform of a Navy SEAL and the white coat of a surgeon. In both my careers, I've lived by a code that puts service above self, he told the cadets. The badge you'll receive today represents a similar commitment. It isn't a shield from accountability or a license for power. It's a symbol of the tremendous trust your community places in you and your sworn obligation to honor that trust. As Elijah concluded his remarks, he shared a revelation that brought the story full circle in a way few could have anticipated. 7 years ago, I led a classified mission to rescue American hostages in a location I still cannot name. One of those hostages was a 19-year-old college student named Michael Reynolds, who had been volunteering with a humanitarian organization when his group was captured by terrorists. A murmur ran through the audience as the connection became clear. Michael Reynolds is the son of former Judge Catherine Reynolds, who presided over my bail hearing. She never knew my role in her son's rescue because the operation remains classified. But I knew even as she initially failed to protect my rights in her courtroom. The revelation landed with stunning impact, the complex interconnectedness of human lives, the invisible threads that bind us even across the divides of race, power, and privilege. That mission reminds me of an essential truth, Elijah continued. We are all capable of being both victims and heroes in different contexts. We all need help sometimes, and we all have the capacity to help others. The true measure of our justice system and our society is how we treat each person's humanity regardless of what we can see about them at first glance. As Elijah concluded his address, the new officers rose in a standing ovation, their faces reflecting the possibility of a new kind of policing based on respect, accountability, and recognition of shared humanity. The transformation that had begun with one officer's injustice and one man's dignity was expanding outward, changing not just policies and practices but hearts and minds. The road ahead remained long, with much work still to be done. But the path toward justice had been irrevocably illuminated. What do you think about the power of one person to create systemic change? Could Elijah's approach to transformation, rather than punishment, be applied to other social justice issues? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can all contribute to building more just systems. If this story moved you or made you think differently about the complex issues of race and justice in America, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might benefit from this perspective. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the badge of injustice, the story that reminds us how a single moment of injustice can ultimately lead to profound and necessary change. This powerful story reminds us that true justice requires both individual courage and systemic change. Dr. Elijah Washington's experience demonstrates that even those who serve our nation at the highest levels aren't immune to racial profiling and discrimination. His response, maintaining dignity while strategically fighting for accountability, shows that resistance doesn't always mean aggression. Sometimes it's exhibited through unshakable composure and strategic action. The case highlights how institutions protect their own until forced into transparency by irrefutable evidence and public pressure. Mrs. Patterson's video recording proved that individual witnesses can catalyze massive change when they refuse to stay silent. We also learned that transformation requires addressing root causes, not just punishing individual actors. By focusing on reforming the system rather than seeking revenge, Elijah created lasting impact beyond his personal vindication. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals our interconnectedness, how Judge Reynolds unknowingly owed her son's life to the very man whose rights she failed to protect. This powerful coincidence reminds us that justice isn't abstract. It's about recognizing our shared humanity despite superficial differences. What moment in this story resonated most deeply with you? Was it Elijah's remarkable composure during injustice, Mrs. Patterson's courage in recording evidence, or the systemic changes that followed? Comment below with your thoughts on how ordinary citizens can help build more accountable justice systems in their own communities. If you believe these conversations about justice reform matter, please hit that subscribe button to join our community of thoughtful storytellers and changemakers. Like this video if you found value in Elijah's approach of transformation over retribution, and share it with someone who might need this perspective. Thank you for engaging with difficult but necessary conversations about justice in America. Remember that each of us has the power to stand for what's right even when it's not easy.